The history of heavy.
Hello and welcome to the clusterfuck episode of the History of Heavy podcast, the show that is supposed to trace the chronology of heavy music across genres, song by song. I'm Michael Huntsman. That is Big Daddy Dave Lieberman. This is take 25 after a lot of technical difficulty that is trying to prevent us from talking about Black Sabbath tonight, but we will not be denied, Dave.
We will not be stopped.
We will not be stopped. This is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. I just have to say, I'm a little sick. I am sick of trying to start this podcast. I am sick of not talking about Black Sabbath. So I'm here for a little medication.
Yeah, that medication will be a Bloody Sabbath for sure. If the audio quality is bizarre this episode, that is why. We expect it to be corrected next time. But we are happy to finally be recording and talking about Black Sabbath. This is our final episode of the year of 1973. After having talked about Alice Cooper and Nick Romandis and James Brown and Betty Davis, we are capping the year, as we always do in any year that Black Sabbath has released a studio album, by talking about that Black Sabbath album. And tonight, that is, of course, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. This is the record number 5, Dave. We're chugging along quickly, although it does feel we started in 1958. We're finishing in 1973. We have a long way to go, but we've covered a lot of ground so far.
We have, and I wouldn't say we're finishing in 1973, but we are finishing up 1973.
Well said. Well said. And to finish up 1973, we have to at least make a pit stop at the Cultural Corner to see if there is any ephemera left to discuss about the year 1973 before we go to 1974 next week. Dave, what do you got for us this time?
Dave's Control!
Well, to tee us up for this conversation about Black Sabbath, I will tell you that Black Sabbath, Black Sabbath, Black Sabbath, Black Sabbath, Black Sabbath, Black Sabbath. And that concludes the Cultural Corner.
I think that is perfectly succinct for this evening's conversation. I will now...
Been through so much.
Yeah, we have been through a lot in 1973 and in the year of our Lord 2026 as it stands right now in February. But we are about to get into the fun of it. So let's talk a little bit about the events leading up to and the recording of Black Sabbath's fifth record, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. The story goes like this. Following Sabbath's exhaustive 1972-73 world tour in support of Volume 4, they returned to the Record Plant Studios in Los Angeles to begin work on that album's successor. However, after a month of continued substance abuse and Tony Iommi's severe writer's block, they had nothing recorded and opted to return instead to the UK, where they rented Clearwell Castle in the Forest of Dean in England, where the likes of Led Zeppelin, Mott the Hopple, and I almost said Def Leppard, and Deep Purple, the Def Leppard of their day, had previously recorded. As Geezer Butler describes it, we rehearsed in the dungeons, and it was really creepy, but it had some atmosphere. It conjured up things, and stuff started coming out again. While working in the dungeon, Iommi stumbled upon the main riff of the song, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, which set the tone for the new material. Geezer continued, "We almost thought that we were finished as a band, but once Tony came out with that initial riff for Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, we were back." Building on the stylistic change introduced on Volume 4, New songs incorporated synthesizers, strings, keyboards, and more complex arrangements. Iommi even experimented with sitar and bagpipes in the studio, but was unable to master the instruments to his satisfaction. Recording was completed at Morgan Studios in Willersden, North London, with the band producing. Yes keyboardist Rick Wakeman, who was recording in the studio next door to where Sabbath was recording Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, was brought in as a session player, appearing on the track Sabracadabra. He refused payment from the band and was ultimately compensated by a case of beer for his contribution.
Your money's no good here.
Your money is no good, but this ale will satisfy you just fine, Mr. Wakeman. The members of Led Zeppelin, I kind of like that. That could be our cover band, Led Zeppelin, who were close friends of Sabbath in the early days, both coming from Birmingham, of course, showed up at the studio during the recording of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Drummer John Bonham had also really wanted to play on Sabracadabra, but didn't end up on the track, though the two bands had an improvised jam session, which was recorded but never released. I would kill to hear that. Yeah, where is that? Finally, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath was released on the 30th of November, 1973. Upon its release, the band began to receive favorable reviews by the mainstream press for the first time in their careers, with Rolling Stone magazine calling the album an extraordinarily gripping affair and nothing less than a complete success. AllMusic cited the album as a masterpiece essential to any heavy metal collection, while also displaying a newfound sense of finesse and maturity. The album marked the band's 5th consecutive platinum-selling album in the United States. It reached number 4 on the UK charts and number 11 in the US. In the UK, it was the first Sabbath album to attain silver certification, which is 60,000 units sold, and it achieved that in February of 1975. Iommi called Sabbath Bloody Sabbath the band's pinnacle. Geezer said that it was a whole new era, and they felt really open on that album. It was a great atmosphere, a good time, and great coke. Just like a new birth for us. Ozzy called Sabbath Bloody Sabbath their last truly great album, which I staunchly disagree with, and we will get into that at the end of 1974. He went on to say that music that they managed to strike was exactly the right balance between their old heaviness and the new experimental side. He also said that Sabbath Bloody Sabbath was the beginning of the end for Black Sabbath's original lineup, and that it was really the album after which he should have said goodbye, because after that, things really started unraveling. That is the story of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, Dave. I'm going to pause there. Thoughts on any or all of that? I know you've read a bunch about this album and the time making it, so I skipped over a bunch of details, but thoughts about Sabbath at this period of time?
So really kind of a lot to unpack there. I agree with so much of that, and that's the characterization of the album as a pinnacle and as the beginning of the end would be kind of a different way of saying the same thing, right? Because the pinnacle is so high of an altitude, the end takes a long time and covers a lot of great ground. I don't know that I necessarily agree that it's the pinnacle, but if you look at it that way, you can still acknowledge great albums on the way down because there's a lot of altitude there. That said, it also, your intro also talked about how it was a really good balance, how Ozzy said it was a good balance between the old Sabbath and the experimental side. And that's something I do agree with. I think it sounds very mature. It sounds very balanced, complex, and nuanced in a way that they hadn't been so nuanced before. Like they were a cudgel before. But listening to it just before this podcast, I was thinking that Sabracadabra sounded a lot like a Beatles song, or Spiral Architect. Sounded
that makes
like
more sense. Yeah.
A lot like a Beatles arrangement. Like it could have been on Sgt. Pepper. very orchestral, but also the actual this whole album is a lot less riffy and a lot more thematic.
Mm.
And it's more interesting in a lot of ways. The fact that it's a Sabbath album doing that, let me put it differently. It still sounds like Sabbath is doing that. It's all Sabbath seasoning, it's all Sabbath ingredients, but it's not the meat and potatoes. It's a more nuanced version of the same ingredients. And I really do like this album, and I like this album as a full meal. I put it on, I listened to the whole thing, but it's been years since I've really sat down to savor it. And so I love these sessions because I get to hear this album for the first time again. And knowing the album and listening to it again for the first time really punctuated how different this was from prior Sabbath albums, but how it was definitely Sabbath doing this album. And so it comes, all the orchestral stuff, violins, piano, more some acoustic guitar in the background,
Synthesizer.
Yeah, synthesizer. It's all there, and but it gives it a bit of a there's a sense of like dreaminess, and there's a sense of spaciness, like outer space in some of the effects, and even it felt like Tony Iommi's guitar work. Sometimes it wasn't so much riffing; it was just a little bit of a melodic um, theme with a different guitar effect, and so it just adds a lot of texture. Very, very interesting, and it's still engaging because there's these heavy moments throughout without this feeling like it's too heavy of a like a burden of heaviness. There's a heaviness about it that is characteristic. It also felt a lot more approachable in a commercial way. Like a lot of these, I feel like could get a lot more radio play and get a lot more broad appeal. Um, but all of that is to say that it's definitely a peak moment, I think, for Sabbath in that balance between where they had come from and where they were going to end up.
Yeah, agree with all of that. You know, I have said on past episodes, and I have long held the opinion or the framing about Sabbath's first six albums, you know, the great Aussie records, as being a triad, effectively. That the first album and Paranoid are the first prong, and Master of Reality and Volume 4 are the third, and then this album and Sabotage are the third. Sorry, second and third. But I think another way to think about it is Black Sabbath, Paranoid, and Master of Reality are the weed records, and Volume 4, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage are the coke records. And they do, they're between those two halves, there is kind of a very fine line that the bluesiness that so defined the early records is almost completely gone here. And in favor of, like you talked about Sergeant Pepper's, it's almost the same line. You know, the Beatles go from Meet the Beatles and Help to Revolver and Rubber Soul to Sergeant Pepper's and Abbey Roads, and you know, and a lot of that is there as they are going through the various drugs that they have imbibed in, have altered the way they think about their music and their art and the world, and it seeps into the songs, and certainly that's what happened with Sabbath.
Interesting how these bands go on these arcs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, you talk about the quality of the album, and I could not agree more with the sentiment that it is a complete experience, maybe more than any other Sabbath album. It feels like one statement across the 38 minutes, I think it is what it is. And I'm not going to spoil the ending. We'll get into Sabbath v. Sabbath at the end. But if any Sabbath fan or even a casual metal fan said, or rock fan or whatever said that Sabbath Bloody Sabbath was their favorite Black Sabbath record, I wouldn't bat an eye. Like I think it is fully acceptable to say that the record to me is that good that I wouldn't look at somebody sideways, where there's a lot of bands you get this deep in their catalog and you say their fifth album is my favorite. And it's like, well, you're fucking crazy. Particularly a band like Sabbath, who had already released at least 3 totally classic certified, perfect records.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's crazy to say that whether or not it's my favorite, and again, I don't want to spoil anything, but whether or not it's my favorite, I don't think it's crazy to say Sabbath Bloody Sabbath is your favorite Sabbath record.
I think it's interesting. I think it's not a wrong thing. It's a personal thing. What's another way of saying it? It's maybe like a guitar, right? Different guitars make different sounds. They kind of have different tones. And if you line up 5 different electric guitars that have been used by your favorite bands, and you picked one, that might not be the most popular, that might not be the most influential, but it would still be a significant one. And so I think I hear what you're saying, right? Any Sabbath album that you pick as your favorite Sabbath album isn't going to be wrong, but it's an interesting personal statement about you.
Yeah, well, one of the things I really love about this album in particular, and we often talk about the spectrum of the styles and genres that Sabbath played with, that they weren't just this bludgeoning hard rock or heavy metal band. They did a lot of different things, despite of kind of how they're seen broadly. This record kind of does it all. I mean, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, particularly the end, the dun, 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 that end bridge part, one of the heaviest thing they've ever done.
It has kind of a jigga to it,
absolutely. Absolutely. Fluff is one of their most beautiful instrumentals that they ever wrote. Sabracadabra has one of the greatest riffs they've ever written. Spiral Architect has one of their most beautiful orchestral flourishes in it. Sort of those kind of peak moments touching across all these genres. You could argue the peak of those moments are all found on this record. Obviously the other records are great. We've already talked about those records. Tonight we're talking about how great this record is. But I do think the highs on this record are really fucking high. And despite its commercial success, if you just look at the song list, the only song on this album that I think most casual fans recognize is the title track.
Yeah.
The other songs, if you're ahead, of course you know them, but I think broadly speaking, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath is really the one song on this album that most people know by name.
Yeah, the rest I think are a little more deep tracks, but they're so good. A National Acrobat is one of my favorites. Killing Yourself to Live is it's catchy and easy it pulls you in really easy. It's very palatable. Looking for Today. Excuse me. And I gotta say, just a moment on Fluff, right? I'm not always a big fan of the Sabbath instrumentals, but Fluff I really like, and I think that it's more like Orchid and
Solitude.
Thank you, on Solitude, where it just again shows their range and their talent to be able to not only pull off something that is a palate cleanser. In the moment of the album, it is Fluff is number 3 between some rockin' songs, and then Sabracadabra, which is half and half. But also in their own, what am I trying to say? it's good balance, but it's still a Sabbath song. It's a softer, easier, kinder Sabbath song, but it's still a Sabbath song.
Mhm.
And they're able to do that. And it's difficult for a band to be able to do that.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think it's those moments, Fluff and Who Are You in particular, and Who Are You, written by Ozzy on a Moog synthesizer, which I think is crazy. I don't ever think of Ozzy as writing any music at all, so I think that's just so cool. But those two songs are a little bit outliers in terms of their mood and atmosphere. But to me, those two songs in particular are kind of what tie the record together as a complete statement, because it does go on this kind of emotional journey in and out of the songs. And those songs really lend themselves to kind of these subtler moments along that journey. And they don't feel that they might be lesser songs than, Sabracadabra or the title track or a National Acrobat, but the album would be lesser for not those songs. Like those
Agreed.
songs really add to the
And
whole
Who Are
picture.
You in particular gives it a lot of that spacey kind of feel, and that brings a little more psychedelic flavor back in. It isn't, but it's both a touch back to kind of a more psychedelic with a prophecy of what's to come with the 80s. With that synthesizer
Mhm.
treatment.
There's so much of what we talk about is how influential Black Sabbath was. And I first started thinking about this record, and I've listened to this album front to back many times in recent years, so haven't had the same kind of like reintroduction maybe experience that you had digging into the record front to back. But one of the things I wanted to do to talk about it with you tonight is go song by song and say, well, this song sounds like this, and this song clearly influences, and it's just it's so easy to do with Sabbath stuff. But specifically, Who Are You? For those of you that are Van Halen heads, there is the instrumental song on Fair Warning is called Sunday Afternoon in the Park. And it is Eddie, his first exploration into synthesizer. It's Eddie playing synthesizer, which is different than Ozzy playing synthesizer. But the tone specifically of Who Are You sounds just like Sunday Afternoon in the Park. And that's probably a stretch to say that one influenced the other. But Van Halen was super close with Sabbath. They certainly had
Blew them off the
relationship, and
stage.
they were paying attention to what each other was doing and whatever. And this was, probably a bit before they connected, because it's not until 1978 that Van Halen is opening for Sabbath. But I wouldn't be surprised if there was some influence there, like a lot of these songs, that inspired so many bands that came after. But I thought that specific influence was potentially kind of interesting.
Well, can you go through some of the other songs that you find analogous to a later band or a later song or later sound?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't end up writing any of these down. The one thing I will say, and this is the most obvious one, and there certainly is some sludge metal stuff in here. There's some obviously doom metal forever, but the thing that I hear really on this album way more than on any of the first four is how much the vocal melodies on this album sound like what Ozzy would sound like in Blizzard of Oz. That the looking for today, that part, the vocal line in Spiral Architect, like the way Ozzy is using his voice on this record has so much melody in it, and it's so upfront. And I don't know that he's doing all that much different with his voice than he did on the prior four records, but just maybe it's a confidence or something that it just sounds a lot more like the Ozzy solo stuff that would come to me way more than he did on previous records.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's very interesting.
And then there's the part in, I think it's the guitar in Spiral Architect that sounds a lot like the guitar melody in the song Diary of a Madman. And I know that came from, like, that's a Bach concerto or something that Randy Rhoads got it from. So it's probably not a phrase that Tony Iommi created out of thin air. It comes from some, piece of classical music originally. But there's definitely that kind of haunting tone that again would show up later in Blizzard of Oz, which I thought, was a little bit more apparent here. And it's also, I mean, it's 1973, so not exactly, but recording techniques are changing. Bands' approach to music, bands like Black Sabbath being played on the radio. I think you talked about some more radio-friendly stuff on this. There's probably a little bit more of a, I hate to say pop, but probably a bit more of a pop sensibility creeping in a little bit.
I think that's fair. And I also think that, two things are kind of converging here in 1973. You're having a convergence of Black Sabbath at their arc in their own band's history, but it turns out that is happening simultaneously with this arc of heavy that really got going in 68, 69, 70, really took hold with 1970, I think, with their emergence and their coalescence of the kind of, they were pulling on strings that were left there, but they used those to like pull up, and now that's an established level. And then there's a level on top of that in 1972. So now we're in 1973. And so they're kind of, we've talked about these pinnacles and these pinnacle riffs and pinnacle themes found throughout this album. It kind of feels like they're standing on the shoulders of the giants that were them earlier.
Yeah.
And the stuff, like, they've now like laid enough runway for there to begin to be influence. They have influenced some things that they're now, it's like when a wave rolls over a wave as the wave is coming in. They've already built that wave of other people are contributing now, and other bands are bringing that sound, and they're able to use that as to get a little more lift. I don't know. I also feel like the length of this album is again kind of that perfect. It's such a sweet spot. It's such a sweet spot, and the way the album is constructed, it comes on really strong and reminds you, hey, this is Black Sabbath. And then it says, but check out what we can do, and look at who we are, who we're becoming, and how we sound. And then it ends. I love how this album ends with just that little outro, the last 10 seconds of just a little bass.
It's like a movie ending.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's just like the way it just fades out, there's like applause.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh,
so good.
Very, very, and so different.
A lot of what's talked about with Tony Iommi is how simple his riffs are, how effective yet simple. And I was thinking about that in relation to him being stuck and not being able to come up with anything, and then ultimately coming up with the riff for Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, which is incredibly simple. It's very simple. But the pain that he went through to get to that simplicity is what makes it so beautiful and amazing. It's also incredibly memorable and powerful. And I was
Yeah.
thinking about Sabbath as the greatest metal band of all time in comparison to the Ramones, the greatest punk band of all time, who are famously incredibly simple. And there's a reason that their music is so effective and powerful and timeless. And it's in that simplicity. And it's not, the simplicity is not what you hear. What you hear is the catchiness, the power, the drive, the gallop, the rhythm, the groove, the whatever. And you and that is the complexity of the simplicity. That is why you don't just roll out of bed and write the riff to Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. You know, that is why you have to be touched at some point to where divine intervention puts it into your fingers and you write that riff that nobody will ever forget after you hear it once.
Yeah, but you like the other part of that context is you already wrote like the 4 best albums worth of riffs.
Right, you've already written 200 riffs that are right. That's
so
right.
It can't be one of those. And same with the Ramones. Like they're in the same 3 chords their whole goddamn career, but they keep coming up with new ways of playing those same songs. That has to be challenging at a certain point because you've already written it a certain way. You can't redo that. Although they get pretty close in some songs, but the
Ramones are like Pinhead is not that far away from Teenage Lobotomy is not that far away. You know, it's like whatever. But there's so many. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath for sure. A National Acrobat, Sabracadabra, Killing Yourself to Live, Looking for Today, and Spiral Architect all have at least 2 or 3 riffs within each of those songs that are fucking note perfect and incredible.
And one of the things I noticed is like what's different about this album is that in other albums, the riffs inside the songs are heavy as fuck. And that's oftentimes where the heavier part is, even though it's a super catchy song. And in these songs, that super heavy riff isn't given the heavy treatment. The effects and the texturing, it is a heavy riff, but it's pulled back a little bit, and it's underneath some of the other texture. And so that's what I was hearing for the first time again today, was like, oh yeah, that riff, I remember that riff. I thought it dropped heavy, but it just is a heavy riff, but it's just there. He just snuck it in.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really interesting feature of this album, and I don't really see that until you get into a couple of songs on Never Say Die.
Yeah, I this might be a dirty word as it relates to this band or this kind of music, but I think this is their most mature album.
Mm-mm. Yeah, and
I'm here for it.
Yeah, me too. I don't call that a dirty word. I think that's how Ozzy called it, right? He said it was a pinnacle. I think that's what he meant. There's certain elements of the band that are peaking, and we can have an appreciation for their later music that is equal or elevated beyond this, that is just a ramp up. But in certain aspects, the band as they came together, the chemistry of the band may have peaked here. And it's absolutely, it feels mature, but it's a kind of maturity that is confident. It's on the line of confidence rather than arrogance.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They just know who they are.
Okay, give me your favorite song and give me your favorite 3-song sequence.
Ooh. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath's a banger, but I really like National Acrobat and Sabracadabra.
Yeah, me too. That's got to be I mean, Fluff kind of screws it up, but I mean, Fluff is great, but the right answer is Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, National Acrobat, and Sabracadabra, right? Like that's right. The right answer.
Right, and I've been tripping over how if I'm gonna have to pick 3, it's Who Are You Looking for Today and Spiral Architect.
See, I think I would go Sabracadabra, Killing Yourself to Live, and Who Are You? But it speaks to the strength of this album that there really is not a bad answer. It's funny. I don't know.
Yeah, those three are the three, not because you want to exclude one, but because you want to include two.
Right. Yeah, I put a couple of months ago, I put Spiral Architect on a playlist that had a bunch of other just random, it was all kinds of music on it, and was super excited to put Spiral Architect on it. And I was listening back to it a couple of weeks after I made it, and it absolutely did not fit. Like, it came on and I was like, this feels really out of place. And I ended up putting, I took a Sabbath song from a different record, I can't remember what, and replaced it. And it speaks to how it needs to be part of the whole. I talk about this with Slayer's Rain and Blood all the time, is that apart from Angel of Death, none of those songs really work as effectively if you lift them out of the whole. But as a 30-minute complete statement, that is a perfect record, like a perfect record. But the songs, coincidence. That was a coincidence. But like we're talking about tonight, apart from the title track here, well, Sabracadabra, I guess, but I think these songs are much stronger on the backs of each other as an 8-song sequence than they are when you pull any one of them out.
Yep, over and over.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, what else, Dave? Anything else we need to gush about Sabbath Bloody Sabbath?
No, I was glad to reintroduce myself to this album. I listened to it, but I listened to it in such a way that I feel like I'm so familiar with it that I just listen to it as a background. And because it flows together, I have a really hard time remembering which song is Sabracadabra and which song is Looking for Today and Spiral Architect. Like, wait, what is that? Oh, that's the one that's called Sabracadabra. The title doesn't make sense as the song.
And it's one of the greatest titles ever, though.
Right. And it's a great song. It's just like, I forget that's what it's called because they're not singing Sabracadabra.
Thank God. That is one of, as impossible to find one or even 4 or 5 or 10, but that is an all-time great Iommi riff. All-time great. Okay, you know what it's time for? It's time for Sabbath v. Sabbath, Dave. Every time we do a Black Sabbath episode, we pit the Current Conversations album against what we have deemed our favorite so far. Volume 4 is the current champion for both of us. Each episode we've done a Black Sabbath album, that episode's album has beaten the previous because we've just engulfed ourselves in the flame of the record and can't see past it. But what's going to happen tonight, Dave? Is Sabbath Bloody Sabbath going to beat Volume 4 for you tonight?
Tonight, Mike, Volume 4 is going to win. Volume 4 is going to take it for me. I have a deeper relationship with Volume 4, and the heaviness of Volume 4 has a polarity that has just roped me in.
I have a similar sentiment, and I thought about it like this, and this is a podcast, so it's appropriate for us to make dramatic statements periodically. And here is my dramatic statement. I think that there are 3 albums that have a legitimate argument to be considered Black Sabbath's best album. Forgetting personal opinion, just sort of objectively sitting back and gazing at the discography, I think the 3 albums that you can definitively say front to back are Black Sabbath's best album are Paranoid, Master of Reality, and Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. I really do think that is true. However, as I said at the top, I think any one of the first 6 Black Sabbath records as somebody's favorite record is totally legitimate and altogether fair, because that's how good each of those first 6 records are. And for me, my favorite Black Sabbath record as of recent years and still today is Volume 4. So Volume 4 is going to go on against Sabotage for me.
Interesting. I thought that Sabbath Bloody Sabbath had it for a minute there with you.
I thought so too, and I'm cheating a little bit and looking ahead, and I might regret this because I love Sabotage, and it has kind of a special place for me that I will get into when we talk about that record. But Volume 4 has just really dug its hooks into me in recent years, and I again, I think you could objectively argue that Sabbath Bloody Sabbath is a better record front to back. But for me, just I have an emotional connection to Volume 4 that is more intense than my emotional connection to Sabbath Bloody Sabbath.
I get it, man. You are forgiven.
So thank you, sir. So that puts a cap on 1973. It was a messy start to the episode. Hopefully we got our feet underneath us at some point. Next week, we are moving into 1974. So there will be all kinds of cultural corner stuff to talk about. There will be a bunch of songs to talk about, of course, before we get to Sabotage, which came out in 1974. And we will begin going to Germany. We haven't spent any time in Germany on this show, but next week, I thought we really needed to get into some krautrock. And the way we're going to do that is via the song Krautrock by the band Faust. That will be an interesting conversation because there's a bunch of things around the notion of heavy to discuss as it relates to the song and the genre. But I think that will be a fun and interesting conversation. That will be next time.
Very much looking forward to it, Mike.
It'll be good. Until then, thanks for watching and or listening. And as always, stay heavy.
Okay, thank you. Bye.